All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, we've got a few topics. We're going to start with fitness stuff, then we're going to end with football stuff. So we'll start and end with fun. And then we've got some stupid shit in the middle. You've got Trump
Yeah.
assassination number two. I've got Kamala endorsed by the IRS. And we've also got some possible, if we're making good time, throw in some stuff I have to do for social psychology and why social psychology has a bad replication crisis going on, and how bias within the study is very subtle, and that's a thing you're supposed to look for in research when you're evaluating it, but also when you're doing it. And I think this is where the hubris comes in, that they don't understand their own bias. As I think Robert Greene said, the more certain somebody is that they have the answers, the more stupid they are.
Oh, remind me that I have an anecdote for this that involves my daughter in her first semester of college classes. And
Oh, that's already started. That's right.
she has run into something that is a doozy and
Okay, so
relates
so that
directly
was going to
to
be
that.
if we have time, but maybe we prioritize squeezing that in then
Yeah.
if we got two sides to this story. All right, but
Well,
let's start with squats. You tell me your
yeah.
experience that you texted me, and
Mhm.
I have some visuals up. Like I said, there is a full episode on this. I forgot to go look at which episode that is, but uh also you can go to our sponsor, Real Fitness and Performance, and check out the squat stuff, finding the proper squat for your body. If you search for it in the search tab, that won't work. So, because I just tried to bring it up by doing that, and I had to go to the page, and even then, it didn't search for it properly. So,
The channel is Real Fitness, and there's some numbers there, right?
yeah, let me Real Fitness.
Because
Oh,
there are a couple of Real Fitness channels, quite a few Real
70,
Fitness
yeah,
channels.
7670, I think it is.
Okay,
Let me,
because the first time I looked for it, I was like, boy, there are a lot of people calling themselves Real Fitness, and some of these just
yeah,
look as
at
as
Real
as
Fitness
sketchy and
7670.
buzzwordy as everything else.
Yeah.
7670. Okay.
Yeah. Which is
I
funny
I
because there's
have
only two Real Fitness LLCs in the country. And because I had to do that when I was getting the name. So Real Fitness 7670 is
so
the channel.
yeah, and your squat video in particular, I have written that down and recommended it to people because it is so comprehensive, but not that long because it's only like what 15 minutes.
I
Uh,
believe it's 20,
okay, 15 to
but
20
yeah,
minutes,
but
somewhere in that range.
depending on 1831.
Okay,
1831.
but as I said, it's comprehensive. So
Mhm.
you manage to cover a very complex subject in a pretty short amount of time.
Well, and the
And
approach is different because
yes,
it's it's a feel-based approach versus a this is what it should look like
hmm
approach. And I think we're gonna really touch on that with what you brought to me.
hmm
Uh, so yeah, it's a this is how it should impact your body versus this is what the textbook says it should look like.
basically what you do is you take that segment from Brett Contreras's butt wink video that I've referenced a number of times, where he takes out Skelly, his little miniature skeleton, to show you what the body actually looks like, what the bones look like in a squat to explain a butt wink. And then he says, but there's textbook and then there's practical. And he kind of explains the difference in that and how that's going to adjust how each individual squats. So basically, you take that idea and you explain it in 18 and a half minutes.
Hmm.
And the the reason this came up is because the other day I got doubly annoyed at the gym because they had been cracking down. I'd seen the staff a couple of times tell people, "Hey, no, take the tripod down. You want to film yourself, fine, but you can't go setting up tripods and crap. You're getting in the way of other people." And they either didn't or they decided it didn't matter because it was a really light day and there were only a couple of us in the free weight area, and so maybe they figured well, it's fine, it's not in the way. But it annoyed me on general principle and on the practical. But then it got worse because this guy was coaching someone professionally or just friend, I don't know, and having her do goblet squats For those who don't know, that's holding a dumbbell up under your chin and then doing a squat with her heels propped up on a 45 plate that was on the floor. Fine. And I kind of noticed it because I noticed that going around. Everything old is new again, because that was a fad several years ago, whereas everyone was doing it. And then I started looking around and I'm realizing literally everyone I saw doing any kind of squat in the gym that day, whether it was on the Smith machines or whether it was free weight or even some people just doing body weight squats, which is problematic, which we'll get into when you get into the explainer of what this is all about, of having their heels propped up. And I'm like, literally everyone is doing heel elevated squats in here today. What is this new fad? There must be something going on the Instagrams. But what really drove me crazy is that as this girl was doing this, he was trying to coach her to go, as they say, ass to grass, or more specifically, butt to calves.
Mm-hmm.
Go so deep that your butt touches your calves at the bottom of your squat, right? And she couldn't do it, which immediately made me realize you literally have no idea what this technique is for. Because she can't do it, what should be a clue to you, oh, I need to work on this element of mobility rather than giving her this crutch and then forcing her to sprint with crutches.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up a visual here in a second, but one of the main things about this is a pendulum swing. So way back in the day, we had lifting shoes were invented, right? Lifting shoes, if anybody's ever worn them, have wooden soles and they elevate your heels. Anybody who's ever been to a strip club knows how this works. Why do they wear stilettos? Because they can pop it and drop it, like, like Snoop Dogg recommends, right? Pop, drop, and lock it, or whatever it is. And they can get butt to heels with their body perfectly erect, which is very visually stimulating, right? Because it's not someone leaning forward and bad posture and everything. Good posture actually is attractive. So if you can pop your butt low and make it jiggle while your boobies are still sticking out, that's going to get you more dollar bills, right? There's a reason for that. Because
that's going to push all those, ape brain buttons in our male brains.
Yep. And our ape brain is actually designed to look for signs of health. So someone who can squat low and stay there while maintaining posture actually probably is pretty damn healthy. Mm-hmm. Okay. So back to the training part, if you want to squat low from a performance standpoint, elevate your heels a little bit. Bodybuilders do it, power lifters do it. They also wear deadlift suits and bench press suits because it helps you do more, right? It is an extracurricular way of getting better performance, which actually has a time and place. The fact that everybody's doing it all the time is because people see something and they jump on the bandwagon, right? I have to deal with this with the strength coach for the local high school because he does it with the athletes. So I have to accommodate my training with the guys that I work with simultaneously to counter the bad effects that it can have. So let me give an example that's semi-unrelated, but it has the same principle. When I'm training performance versus health, say I've got a baseball player, we're in the off season. The majority of the off season, we're going to be squatting either barefoot, minimalist, or cross trainers, something along those lines where your feet are not elevated. And we're going to do the mobility exercises such as wall ankle stretches and stuff so they can increase their dorsiflexion because it's good for your health. When I get closer to game time, when I get closer to the preseason, I'm going to be doing things like Anderson squats, where I'm going to have the bar on the pins, and they're going to be in a half squat, and they're going to explode out of it. There's a time and place for both of those. Anderson squats are a partial range of motion, but it's a very safe way to train that explosion without having to worry about any movement deficiencies they may have. But during the majority of the off season, we're going to work on those movement deficiencies. Now let's go back to the current subject. The reason to elevate your heels to squat lower is because your dorsiflexion sucks in your ankle. Okay.
Well,
So,
and I would also add, because you brought up that bodybuilders do this a lot. One of the things I often bring up, because to me training is just Newtonian physics, is the formula for work. Work is a function of force and distance. So that is all hail King Tut, time under tension. If you can go further, maintain that tension through a deeper squat and then more work going up, you're doing more work, which for a bodybuilder whose livelihood depends on maximizing the work on those muscles to build them, then yeah, you can cheat and it's beneficial for you.
well, again, time and place. If I have a muscle building phase in a client, I haven't achieved the dorsiflexion they need to squat low, then maybe I will elevate their heels for that phase. But then we'll also work on the dorsiflexion part of it. Or say I've got a client that had a extremely sprained ankle at a young age, and there's just no way they're going to achieve the dorsiflexion they need. Well, okay, so when we want to work the quads, we will elevate their heels, but then we will do other things in conjunction with that because they just have a physical limitation because of a previous injury. So, and then people with certain bone structures, you know, if they got really extremely long tibias and stuff, you got to account for that. But it is a crutch and it should be used as such. Okay, I have this specific goal. I'm going to do that. But I also need to be doing the things to make my client healthy, or else no matter what goal we go for, they're going to plateau. So let me bring up the visual here. So if you're just listening, what I'm bringing up is just a still shot from the video I made with for squats in my Real Fitness channel. And on the left side, you have the sit back on your heels squat stick figure. In the middle, you have, all the way on the right, you have the pop up on your heels. Now, in this current conversation, imagine there's a plate under that heel. In the conversation that's in the video, it's about the person that pops up on the ball of their foot and they can't keep their heels down. But it's the same concept. Put a plate under there, exact same concept. And in the middle is actually a proper squat, and then a dotted line going down showing the force vectors on that. So what you're trying to achieve with a proper squat from a health standpoint is how to get as deep as possible for my body with the weight centered over my body, which is what the middle is. On the left side, people sitting back to compensate, again, the force vector, the dotted line, to compensate for not falling on your ass, you have to lean forward more. So it becomes kind of a good morning, as the old, anybody watch the Hitler Ripito video where he says, we just taught him to do good mornings with a lot of weight, and yeah, so it becomes more of a back exercise at some point if you sit back too far, because physics, gravity exists, right? And the more weight you have on your back and the more you lean forward, the more forward your center of gravity goes, which means the more your hips have to go back. So that's what happens when you do the sit back approach. That was where the pendulum was about 10, 15 years ago. And now we're slowly swinging towards the right side, which is where the heels are elevated, because look how upright the posture is in that picture. It's almost standing straight up. And I showed this to a client the other day. I put my heels up on a little elevation, and I dropped down my butt to my heels, and I was standing perfectly straight up. And so that's the difference there. But when we talk about force vectors, on the left side, I got an arrow pointing to the hips, because the furthest joint from the center of mass is going to carry the most load. That's just physics. Grab a sledgehammer by the head and then slide out to the end of the handle and feel how it feels. You're going to feel a lot more strain on your grip when the hammerhead is further away from your hand. That's just the way gravity works. And as long as we live on Earth, we don't have to worry about quantum physics when it comes to our health. Okay. Then the right side, where they're up on the toes, you see the force vector going almost through the hips, because they're almost straight up and down, and then knee is way far out front. And this, I like the guy in some ways, but he goes too far. Knees over toes guy made this famous. You need to train this. This is not unhealthy. We went too far in the other way, and everybody's backs hurts now. And I'm like, yeah, but you get there is something in between, which is learning how to freaking squat,
Mhm.
which is your
And back to
whole
the Brett
foot.
Contreras video, he brings up that there are ethnic differences there as well. So you brought up you demonstrating a squat. Your family ethnicity is French and Eastern European,
Yeah,
right?
mostly
But
bohunk. Yeah,
yeah,
mostly Bohemian and Polish. Yeah,
mine is more Northern European. So our pelvises are slightly different.
yeah. And
And
yeah, Irish struggle with deep squats. Polacks we can get down there, so we don't even have to go black and white
mhm,
or anything like that. We can stick with it. All it
it,
as white as white can get. Yeah.
if you look at a Polak Olympian, at the bottom of his snatch and a Chinese Olympian, they look really similar because they have a similar pelvic structure that
Well,
allows them to go deeper than some other
except the
ethnicities.
Chinese do well with the duck-footed pull. So there's a
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
big difference there. But still, I mean, the reason why I made this video the way it is because it's finding the proper one for you. You might
yes.
not be able to touch your heels to your butt. That's okay. I can't touch my heels to the butt, even though I can go completely full, what you would call ass to grass, because my tibia is longer than my femur, which is, again, just physics. If I completely fold that leg, the femur doesn't get all the way down the tibia because it's shorter. I can't help that, but I can go all the way down. Okay.
Hmm.
I can't sit on the ground. I think it's Kliko or one of those famous Olympic lifters where he does a front squat, sits his butt down, puts his feet out in front of him, then brings his feet back up and stands up with like 450 pounds.
Jeez.
I can't do that with no pounds, okay, because my femur is shorter than my tibia. But at the same time, I can get all the way down because I've worked on the hip mobility and the ankle mobility that's involved. Your knee should be a stable joint. It only goes wah, wah, wah. Okay. It only goes
Hmm.
in one direction. It should only go in one direction. Now, it resists torque in all those directions. That's why your ACL and your PCL curve and intertwine kind of like a DNA strand around each other. But at the same time, you don't want to test them. You want to move it in a hinge. So your ankle and your hip have to have the proper mobility. So if I'm adding a crutch every time I do squats, I am only reinforcing the improper mobility. Let me bring up the picture I brought up in the last time we talked about this. Okay, so this is a channel I found last time we talked about. And again, if you're watching, you're seeing this guy squat. He's doing a standard, slightly toes out. I'd call that just outside his shoulders
Hmm.
width stance, and he's not even parallel. There's probably about 5 inches more for him to get his hip crease, not the butt, his hip crease to the level of his knee. Okay, and I have yellow lines drawn up for the dorsiflexion, and we're looking about. It was hard to measure with the way he points his toes out slightly, but we're looking at about, what do you call that? 80 degrees.
Hmm.
80 degrees from 90 would be straight up and 0 would be they're folded over each other. So we're looking at about 80 degrees there. Now, tell me if this switches the picture.
It's not going to. We've tried this before.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's come back to us and then let's switch the picture. This is him with elevated heels. We're close to 90 degrees now
Mhm.
of dorsiflexion, but look how much lower his squat is. So what the plate does, or in his case, he's got some sort of rubber matting there. But what that does, elevating the heel, it is allows you to squat lower without having to dorsiflex your ankle more. So there is more anterior stress on the knee. You're able to get deeper without leaning forward, so less stress on the back. Uh, and you can get around that physical limitation you have with dorsiflexion. So It is a crutch. It allows you to do those things. And if you want to really crush your quads, there's a time and place for it. I sometimes I'll do a finisher where I'll do my normal squat workout, get through all my squats, lunges, split squats, lateral squats, cover the whole gamut. And then I'll do a burnout where I'll put my feet up, my heels up on the I use my glute ham because it's got the thing in front that keeps it from flipping forward, and it's about yay high. So it's just about right. And then I'll just do 50 reps of body weight squats with that and just crush my quads so the lactic acid is through the roof. That's okay. But if I spend all my time there, I never address the problem.
Hmm.
And that's the difference between someone who learned how to train from watching training versus someone who learned how to train from understanding anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics, and then seeing the techniques. It's a big
Hmm.
difference. And this is where we're talking developmental learning 101. If you've got kids, don't teach them to do everything. Let them figure it out. Don't show them how to do it every time,
Hmm.
because then they're going to get a surface level understanding of everything they do.
It's my rant about just pulling out your phone and saying, hey, Google, what is the answer to this question? Here's your answer. Okay, done. Versus actually having to try to find the answer. Or another analogy, because I want to talk football later as an analogy to some stuff, is one of the criticisms of Kellen Moore when he was the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys is that he didn't have an offensive scheme. He had a playbook. He had a collection of plays that he had built up over the years through college and pros and some that he had made up, but he didn't have an actual offensive scheme, which meant he couldn't react because all he could do was try and find the right play rather than trying to find the right method.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not wannabe influencer at the gym. You're not actually training someone. You're just cycling through this list of movements that you have seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's I always call this my big advantage to training baseball players is I've never played baseball. I didn't have my coach's techniques in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have 20 years of basically dogma realistically. I mean, most of it's true because otherwise it wouldn't have survived the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's a big chunk of it that is, well, we did it because that's what we did. We do it because that's what we did. And I work with this on coaches all the time, especially when I worked at the big athletic training center, is, well, just because you did it in college doesn't mean it's right. So let's analyze why you did it. Okay, this part of it was good. And this part of it is, well, retarded. Okay. Oh, did I just get us banned?
Probably.
Probably. Okay. So, our biggest fans are Scott and Ideals, and I don't think they care. So
I'm on the spectrum. I give us a pass.
we forgot to do the comments. Okay, we'll do it right after the squat section. Okay. But it's then you can actually look at it and say, okay, so if there is this part that's bad, is it bad in a way that takes away from the good? So say the answer is yes. Okay, how do we do the good without doing the bad? Say the answer is no. Okay, keep doing it.
Mm,
Okay, that's fine. There's more than one way to skin these cats, right?
right.
So suicides. I hate them. Okay, why do you hate them? Because all they are is just making you tired. But what else do they do? They actually train change of direction very well under duress. Okay, so you can't get the proper training out of your clients with suicides, but maybe we can do that in another way. Let's run timed 5-10-5s. So they start in the middle and they run side to side to side to side to side to side for 30 seconds. Same thing. Same thing, not as problematic with that same client. So you can break down your training methods if you do a bottom up approach to it. Okay, what is good about this exercise?
Hmm.
Burpees, nothing. Okay, let's go on to squats. Okay, so I'm training a full range of motion. If I load it properly, I'm going to get a systemic muscle building effect. I'm going to get a neurological effect in my core, my back, and my legs. Dangers, if I don't have proper ankle mobility, my knees or back could be in danger.
Yep.
So, you break it down from that standpoint. Okay, so how do I get the best method? Sometimes it's elevating the heels. Sometimes it's working supplemental work in that same direction.
The reason to that point and why this is actually going to tie into our next segment when I talk politics is what we try to do, and the reason our social episode is a social episode, not a politics episode, is because we're more concerned with the bigger picture and the bigger ideas. And so it's not just that, hey, not only are you doing this silly technique, but you're doing it badly. It wasn't just that particular instance that made me go, it is an illustration of something we rant about a lot. And the reason the two guys I so often reference and recommend, Eric Cressey and Brett Contreras, the reason I reference and recommend them so much is because they don't just say this one simple trick to blow your quads to get a bigger butt. No, they explain here is why you do this particular movement. Here is what is going on anatomically. Here are, and sometimes they'll talk about the trade-offs of, okay, so if you can't do this thing, you can do this thing instead because. So if you see one of these techniques on the Insta books or the Facegrams, if they don't tell you, if the person demonstrating this technique and telling you you should do it aren't telling you the whys, if they're just telling you the how, then you should be asking questions of, well, but what are the trade-offs here? What are the downsides? Why this movement instead of that movement? And then you should look into that. Because if you don't know the whys of that movement, you just know the how because they showed you the technique, and you don't know the trade-offs because there are always trade-offs, then don't do it until you can learn that.
Well, to answer the question you gave me in the text to finish the segment out is if you were to ask that trainer, why are you doing this? They should be able to come back with the answer of her dorsiflexion is and her hip mobility can't handle a full deep squat right now, but I want to work the quads through a full range of motion and the connective tissue around the knee joint in order to shore it up for heavier load later. And if they can't give you at least close to that answer, then they're just looking at something and doing it. But if they give you that answer, be like, hey, carry on.
Fist bump, bro.
Yeah, fist bump. Yeah. All right. So next segment is health of the nation, not just health of the knees.
All right. This may seem a bit of a stretch or a strange segue, but there is a segue here because Ideals had a comment on our presidential debate video, and he used the N word with a hard R, narrative. And that
you had me in the first half there.
Since he's Russian, does he allowed to get away with it? Or are only Western white people get in trouble for using that word? I don't know. I don't know the rules. I don't know.
No, because whiteness is universal according to the literature.
Oh, okay. Speaking of, this is a tangent, but are you gonna go see Am I Racist?
I might not go see it, but I will watch it at some point when I.
Okay. Yeah. Because since you've read D'Angelo's book, haven't you? Wasn't that one of the ones you read?
Yeah, I did break down. I actually read and broke down one of her books. Yeah. Are we even equal is the title of the book.
The one of the clips I've seen that is just hilarious, which is where he's got a black producer and he convinces her to pull cash out of her wallet and pay reparations to the guy. And oh geez. It's funny because it's terrible. Anyway, speaking of terribleness, the narrative around the debate is what Ideals is talking about here, and how the narrative going into the debate helped frame the narrative coming out of the debate, and why that is so problematic, because much like just Googling the answer and not looking it up for yourself, it is the most surface level of thinking. So as he says, the narrative by the right before the debate was silly. Uh, and he's echoing. I don't remember if I said it here or previously. He's kind of echoing what I said about the Biden debate. Of there was the same narrative going into the 2020 debate,
Hmm.
and because he didn't look like he did in the 2024 debate, everyone said, "See, Biden's great, Biden's fine, everything's fine. Go away, you silly conspiracy theorists." And they did the same thing again going into this debate of Kamala's a moron. She's going to fall flat on her face and she's going to cackle and she's going to look stupid. And because she looked at least competent, that was a win. So everyone expected some sort of slam dunk on Harris. That would only happen in a very specific situation, like when Biden was physically incapable to go on. That outlier created a perception that debates matter when they don't, at least not the arguments themselves. Anybody who has watched online debates long enough knows that there are a number of tricks and techniques to stall any debate, make it a wash. So when Harris held her own, there was a disappointment on the right that Trump didn't do enough. I actually thought Trump did great. He had this focused anger about him of someone who cares, which is an important point because that's one of the things I was asking was, did he come across as empathetic? Because
Mm.
he can be bombastic and arrogant all he wants, but to his hardcore supporters, they truly believe he cares about me, and that's why they're so devoted to him. And that's what he has to convince the people in the middle who aren't hardcore supporters either way. That's what he has to convince them of is, no, I actually do care about you. That Make America Great Again isn't a slogan. It is something I care about to help you.
Yeah, and there were two moments in the history of his popularity in the political realm that I kind of have stuck in my mind, having seen them live as they were. When he was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after basically the only sleep him getting is on the flights to where he's going, and that excludes any meetings he might have had on the flights for like 72 hours. And you could see how tired he was,
Mhm.
but he was out there talking to the first responders, the firefighters, the EMS, the police, and you could see the fatigue in him, but he was still shaking hands and patting backs and saying, you know, here we're doing, let's do this to help you, and what else do you need, kind of thing. And that was one, and the other was the CNN town hall in the beginning of all this during the primary times when she said, how do you want the war in Ukraine to work out? Do you want Russia to win or Ukraine to win? And he said, I just want people to stop dying.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the way he said it was so unrehearsed and genuine
Yeah.
that that was the first time he popped out with those words, you know, because he probably expected certain questions on that topic. But to say, do you want Russia or Ukraine to win is a very pointed question. It's a very binary question.
Yeah.
And he just looked at her and was like, I just want people to stop dying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
those
like
were
the
the two
way
moments. Yeah.
Ideal's phrases this. I like this phrase, an angry patriot, because you could be angry, and if it's righteous anger, people aren't going to be turned off by it. If you can, again, because that's back to the empathy of, if they know you're angry for a good reason, the mama bear ideal of mama is angry because you threatened her cubs. And so then when she gets up in front of the school board or the whatever and is, shouting at them, she's not like a screeching Karen. No, she's right to be angry. And so then there's sympathy there. It was refreshing considering the fact that Trump is kind of lower energy now due to age. The only
Hmm.
misstep I can think of was when he let her pivot from immigration to people leaving his rallies. But that's back to what we talked about, which is a good example of what we talked about, which is she went in there clearly as the prosecutor with this hostile witness, and she wanted to push his buttons, and she knew the judge was going to let her get away with it because she wanted him to become unhinged in the witness seat, which is why she pivoted to that, because she knows that's a trigger for him because he's such a bombastic, arrogant jerk that talk about his rally size and it's
Yeah,
going to get under his skin.
which is funny because uh, one of the topics we were doing over this last week in both my social and cognitive is lawyers leading witnesses
Hmm.
and how it creates false memory, how it creates emotional response, and all of these other things. So it's like, this stuff works, and then you watched it in real time, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, she didn't do that.
Yeah. He shouldn't have wasted any time on that and should have turned that on her immediately. In much the same way that uh, uh, like her very first question and answer was about the economy, and she just kind of punted and pivoted and never answered the question. And if the moderator was being an actual moderator in the way that shockingly Tapper and Bash were in the Biden debate, they would have should have followed up of Madam Vice President, you didn't answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to be combative like they were with Trump, but simply say you didn't answer the question. 30-second follow up. Can you answer the question? Otherwise, he did great. The obvious 3v1 is backfiring in the polls now, which was one of the things I asked of are normie people going to notice? Are they going to care?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I'm kind of wishy-washy on that point of I think they do, I think they might, because I'm starting to think that um one of the things that has made people like you and actual famous people like Tim Pool or Dave Rubin who were lefties and now they're on the right, but they're not really on the right. All that is
Well,
they are
Dax just endorsed Trump this weekend
oh
or
cool.
this week. So,
But one of the reasons it's not a policy thing, it's a culture thing. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get to here is that,
for me, it's policy.
well, but
Yeah.
it's
I
the
am a business owner,
policy,
by the way.
but what got your attention was the culture, was
Yes.
the corruption of these institutions, the corruption of academia, the corruption of law enforcement, which justice is supposed to be blind, and now it is being used as a tool to go after people that the people in power don't like. The media, which was always biased, but now it's worse than bias. It's just completely corrupt. It is state-run propaganda essentially, and a lot of the reporting in COVID. This was it. Was it RFK on Pool where I think the more libertarian guy said, "Well, hey, you didn't come around to our side, so to speak, until COVID," and RFK's response was essentially, "Well, if you weren't radicalized by COVID, you weren't paying attention."
Yeah, that was Luke Rutkowski who
Yeah.
who was questioning him at the time, and yeah, it was something to the extent of, if the overreaches of the government didn't clue you in during COVID, then you weren't paying attention. You were one of the
Hmm.
NPCs, basically.
Hmm.
And Luke is very critical of anybody who he asks questions to. He's the guy that will show up to a Senate hearing and ambush the senator on the way out about their vote and stuff, or show up at their beach house or something. He's done all of those things. And he looked and he goes, wow, that's a great answer. He never says that. And so if you've got somebody who went against character for something, then it probably was a good answer. And we see the change. We see the change in RFK even more so when they tried to pull him off the ballots in New York. That's when he started endorsing Trump. He was still going to run as an independent until the DNC said, you know what? You're hurting us in these
Hmm.
places. We're going to take you off the ballot.
We
But you're
already
not
essentially kicked
hurting
you
us
out
in
of the
Michigan.
party, but
So we're
now,
keeping
yeah.
you on the ballot there.
Hmm.
And this is not a story that's making it nationwide in the mainstream press. Is the DNC is trying to remove him from ballots that hurt them and trying to keep him on ballots that hurt Trump.
Hmm.
And
And the reason for that, I think, is it's the battleground state ones is obvious, is they're trying to siphon votes away from Trump. But the reason they still want him gone where it doesn't matter in these deep blue states is because one of their, again, back to the N word, one of their narratives over the years, especially when Trump won, was the electoral college is antiquated and racist and undemocratic. And one of the reasons Hillary lost, I need to go back and reset this because it's been a while since we talked about this, is it towards the end of the campaign, they started spending money in places that they had locked up. The reason being is that their internal polling was making them worried that they would easily win the electoral college vote, but might actually lose the popular vote. And so they started spending money in places like LA and New York and Chicago, which they had clearly had locked up not only those urban areas, but those states. But they wanted to make sure they got out the vote enough to win a convincing popular vote as well.
Which we all know this is why the argument is still is ongoing forever and ever and ever. The Republicans always have a slight edge in the electoral college, and the Democrats always have the edge in the popular vote because of urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it's going to be, and that's why this is always a fight. But there's a reason the electoral college exists, because it takes a there will always be more people in urban areas than rural areas. But urban areas depend on rural areas for life. So you have to equalize that vote in some way, shape, or form to be able to have a balance between the two, those that are dependent and those that are producers. The dependent have merit if they're working in, your assembly lines, and they're working in your urban style, your Wall Street, your financial institutions, all of these things. But the rural areas are less populated, but the impact of that area is just as great as all the things I just said, because you don't have any of that without food, first of all. And then there's also the raw resources that go into the other stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the fact that this is something Poole does bring up every once in a while. He says if you go in the streets of New York and you interview just randos, you're going to get a large chunk of people that you say, "Where does your state come from?" And they say the supermarket. They don't understand you have to grow a cow
Mm-hmm.
and have to have grass and corn and all of these things that go into it. And then you have to have the gas to get that cow from the farm to the place where it's butchered to the grocery store. They don't understand all of that. They just say, "Oh,
Yep.
food comes from store."
And if you want to know why the Electoral College exists, then all you need to do is look at Illinois. Illinois is a huge state. I've driven through it south to north, and it's a lot of cornfields, a lot of cornfields. And then you get to the Chicago metro area. Illinois is a deep blue state simply because of the Chicago metro area. The Chicago metro runs that entire state because there are so many voters there, and the people they vote in rule the rural areas. It doesn't matter how the rural people want to live their lives, they'll never have enough political power to outvote the Chicago metro area. And it ruins their law. A lot of them, it ruins their lives. That it is a tyranny of the majority, which is what the founding fathers and people before them, like, there was a reason they cited Cato and Cicero all the way back to the Roman Republic area, and the reason the Roman Republic was a republic and the Athenian democracy descended into madness. Anyway, I kind of got distracted there a little bit, but
You
the
were
point,
segueing to, I think you were going to go into assassination attempts.
yep,
But yeah, okay.
but it's we're going to take a little trip before we go there. Of here we are. But first, I want to share this because uh the train of thought I had took a sharp detour, and I was trying to get it back, and then I realized, no, I should stay on this track rather than ranting about the attempt itself. It's the bigger concern right now, much like the debate, was the narrative going in and the narrative coming out. If you want to know about the details, again, just go listen to Dan Bongino's podcast. The radio show is like 2 or 3 hours, but his podcast is only like 45 minutes to an hour. And so if you want to know the details of the assassination attempt and the failures of the security and those kind of technical things, go listen to the guy who absolutely knows what he's talking about because he's literally done it before through 3 administrations. I think that's important to remember. Is he started under Clinton, and then he worked protection for George W. Bush through both of his administrations, and then he worked protection for Obama in his first administration before getting out, and then I think going to the NYPD for a little bit. Anyway, my bigger concern is the narrative and what that means for the culture. Because as I've said, one of my frustrations for a long time has been this is the most important election of your life. And I've repeatedly said, if that is true, then the country's already done, because the country was the Constitution, the government was structured in such a way that a single election, let alone a single election for a single office, president, could ruin the country. That's not supposed to be possible. So if it is possible that the election of a single president could ruin the country, then the country's already over because we have lost that structure. But more recently, I've thought, actually, no, it's worse than that because we've lost the culture. We've lost the structure because we've lost the culture. And so I want to start here with Christopher Rufo, who is, would it be accurate to say he is a left-leaning journalist, but he's an actual journalist, an old-fashioned, I'm going to try and find the truth, no matter whose, you know, whose idol is smashed, whether it's my side or their side. The truth is what matters first.
I would say he's right of me. So it's, yeah, I would say it depends on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of the statements he has made in the gender debates and stuff, were very they weren't extreme, but they were shifted in the direction of the right.
Was he one of the Twitter files guys? Did he get those documents? Was he one
It
of
was
the
Taibbi, it was the Asian guy, can't remember his name, Yang, and Barry Weiss.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew there were 3 or 4 of them, and I was trying to remember if Rufo was one of them. I know
No,
he'd
I know
written
he
a
was.
lot
I know
about
he was
them.
in the Twitter files a lot.
Well, yeah,
But
yeah.
it depends on the topic. I think if you think about things like welfare state and stuff, he would be left of center.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about things such as the trans ideology stuff, he might be shifted to the right, even on like gay rights and stuff. So
Well,
it just depends on the issue. So I would put him right smack dab in the middle.
this
But yeah,
article
he's a
is
good he's a
from.
good journalist because I think he started with homelessness
Hmm.
stuff. Yeah.
So this is from back in August 20. Which would have been after the first assassination attempt, I think.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember when that was.
Because that was July.
Yes, because that was July.
Yeah.
So this is
J7.
August 20 from his Substack, and the headline of this article is Beyond Scandal. The 2024 presidential campaign invites a sense of realism. Every presidential campaign opens with a controversy and closes with a scandal. Faced with this prospect, some observers feel disgust, others stoically accept it as the way of the world, and still others approach it with a Machiavellian delight. They see mudslinging and coarseness as the substance that drives great political drama. The 2024 presidential election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is no different. Vice President Harris began her political career through a high-profile affair with the powerful San Francisco Politico Willie Brown. Her husband, Doug Imhoff, cheated on his first wife with their children's nanny, whom he subsequently impregnated. Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, has embellished his military service to the point that some critics, as an aside, I will add, including a lot of the people he served with, have accused him of stolen valor. And since becoming the Democratic Party's presidential candidate, Harris has changed her positions on multiple issues. These scandal archetypes were once enough to torpedo or at least damage presidential campaigns of men like Gary Hart and John Kerry. I would also add here Joe Biden in his first attempt in the 80s, where it was revealed that he plagiarized most of his work while he was in law school. Back to the article. No longer. Former President Trump, too, has survived a protracted sequence of personal scandals. His romantic life was splashed through the tabloids for decades with multiple marriages, accusations of infidelity and womanizing, and an alleged tryst with a pornographic actress. His political scandals as president included impeachment. After leaving the White House, they have included indictment, arrest, and conviction, incidents with no historical precedent. And yet Trump endures. He has refashioned his criminal conviction, even his scowling mugshot, as the inciting incident for a comeback narrative. Likewise, Harris has trampled the negative stories beneath her feet and represented herself as a defender of democracy. Trump surpassed his scandals through strength of personality, Harris through the power of the national media. What is the significance of this shift in political life? A moralist might argue that we have entered a period of ethical collapse. The old Christian standard no longer holds, it would seem. There is another possibility, however. Maybe we have abandoned moralistic pretense and entered a period of greater realism. This might not be such a discontinuity. As a class, politicians have never been moral paragons. They have always used scandal as a tool. The presidential campaign between Jefferson and Adams was among the most sordid in American history. Even Cicero, in his campaign for consul, solicited advice from his brother, who advised him to tarnish his opponents with sex scandals. And here I am wondering what in the world in Rome could be so scandalous about sex that it would create a scandal. In other words, back to Rufo's article, maybe we have simply stopped pretending. And I'm going to skip down here now to his conclusion. Viewed in this light, a payment to Smutstar or an affair in San Francisco seem less significant. I can't tell anyone the precise formula for making this choice. When Americans cast their ballots, they will find themselves alone with their consciences. But I might suggest that the scandals of this campaign do not indicate a clear moral choice. Partisans might rationalize it as such, but dispassionate voters will see the election as one that invites a sense of realism. Fortune often leaves us in a bind, offering us four possibilities: a good man who does good, a good man who does evil, a bad man who does good, a bad man who does evil. The first and last offer an easy choice, black and white, an easy black and white choice. The second and third are much more difficult and much more common. They are almost always the reality from which we must make our choice. The only imperative is to assess honestly and choose accordingly. Before I go on and why this connects to the assassination, the second assassination attempt, what are your thoughts on that?
Let me start with Stormy Daniels. As Rufo pointed out, it is less consequential to have that scandal. And this is one area where all politicians, I'll say this, but in this particular case, the right answer might be to lean into it. To say, yeah, I did. Wouldn't you have? And then it's over. No one can argue with that. Everybody, you know, the conservatives are going to be like, oh my gosh, it's true. The ones that believe that he actually didn't, you know, he did. We all know he did. You know, the ones, and then you actually have a moral high ground to stand on when you get accused by what's her face, the one that says he raped her in the dressing room or whatever that didn't even exist when she said it happened. You know, then you have that moral high ground of the truth to stand on and be like, why would I do that? I could get Stormy Daniels if I wanted, because I did. You have that. Why not lean into something like that if the moral aspect of it has lowered the temperature of it a little bit? You know, everybody says, oh, you're the most lyingest president ever. So just tell the truth as much as you can. Tell the truth in ways that hurt you. And people believe you more when you tell the truth in ways that could benefit you. All right. So I don't understand why they don't lean to it. Bill Clinton's another example. Be like, hey, I'm a man. I'm a man. That's between me and Hillary right now. Let's get back to politics. What's wrong with that approach?
Well, I'll tell you what's wrong, because this is where I'm going with this. And it's interesting that you bring up Clinton, because I was going to bring him up. So a couple months ago when I brought up when I went way back to like 2012 and brought up articles about Spain's green energy boondoggle and the economic costs of it. One of the reasons I did that is to establish a degree of credibility so that I don't always have to bring up a source. So if I tell you, hey, back here at this time, this thing happened, then you could believe that enough of a political dork that, yeah, I was paying attention then, and I remember these incidents. And so, for instance, this was when he was still denying it. There was I can't remember who it was, but a rather um, famous political feminist who said, hell, I'd give him a blowjob for keeping abortion legal. And the reason I bring that up is because this is one of the things that I have used, not to excuse Trump, which is my problem with Rufo's article that I'll get to in a minute. It's not about excusing. It's not about whataboutism. It's about, do we have standards as a society, as a culture, or don't we? Because all of you people complaining about Trump and how his temperament and his personality and his personal life make him unfit to be president, all of you were literally excusing Clinton and saying it was personal. It's just about sex. Well, first of all, it wasn't just about sex. The reason he was impeached, which he was in the House, and there was a Senate trial and he was not convicted, is because he didn't just perjure himself during an investigation. He suborned perjury. He had other people lie for him under oath. That's a big effing deal for the chief executive. And the kind of person who is the leader of the free world and would have performed salacious sex acts with an unpaid intern under his desk while he's on the phone with world leaders. Yeah, that is also the kind of person who will suborn perjury, which is the ultimate undermining of a justice system.
And well, this is where I agree with Jordan Peterson on one point, and it's a way I've been trying to live my life, which is actually harder than it sounds because everybody thinks they're
Yep.
doing it already. Is tell the truth, at least don't lie. And let's look at the real world implications of that lie. Remember what he did to cover it up or to distract from it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
A lot of people in Bosnia would be alive if he didn't need a distraction.
No, the distraction was attacking uh Al Qaeda in Sudan and Pac
Well, there was that
Afghanistan.
and Bosnia.
I don't know.
Yeah, they
I thought
all.
Bosnia came first, but yeah,
Yeah.
this is where the movie Wag the Dog came from.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people dead for that lie, and that's what I care about. I don't
Mhm.
care about the theatrics. I don't care about the oh whose face is on the dollar bill or whatever. I care about who died in that. That's why I rail against what's happening Russia Ukraine right now. That's why I rail
Yeah.
against all this incitement we're doing in the Israel conflict, which is going to ultimately lead to war with Iran if we keep on the same path. Because this is why I rail against single un non-mother women being the largest voting bloc that's going to decide this election because they have no skin in the damn game when it
Mhm.
comes to war. And a simple, yeah, I did do it. I was tempted at the time. That's between me and Hillary.
Mhm.
That would have saved at minimum thousands, dozens of thousands of lives.
The other thing it would have done, from my point of view, is it would have acknowledged and kept the social moral framework because you acknowledged that you did something wrong morally.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you continue to contend that politically there should be no ramifications for this because list of reasons, you don't destroy this moral framework which has undergirded, to Rufo's point, oh, we're just being real. Yeah, politicians have always been scumbags, but they at least paid lip service to these things that we hold to be good, true, and beautiful.
So let's fast forward. This is my opinion here. I'm going to say it's opinion because you're allowed to have your opinion. It's not defamation. If Harris is elected, we're in World War III. Okay, there's just that. I think that is my opinion because she is hawkish. has to prove a point, as Tulsi
So
Gabbard would
Tulsi's
say.
Burt, she's
Yeah,
insecure. Yeah.
yeah. She's going to have to prove a point, and Russia, Russia, Russia. Okay, so if she is elected, this is probably our path, at least in some degree, right? Uh, and if Trump is elected, we can actually get ahead of that because of his overall ruling philosophy. All right. So now we go back to, we talked about Clinton. Had he leaned in and said, "Yes, I did that," and she profited well from it, it would have ended. It would have ended right there. I did that. She profited from it. It was from my own personal expenses. It wasn't campaign money. That's between me and Melania. Okay. Had he done that, a lot of conservatives would have been like, "Oh, ooh, you shouldn't do that." But at the end of the day, it would have been over and it would have passed.
Hmm.
But the way it played out, because he didn't do that, convicted felon,
Well,
right?
I don't think that would have changed that because the lawfare had already begun.
No,
But
but I'm saying
it,
percentages of a point. No, I'm saying when it for the rumors first came out,
hmm,
way back in 2015 or whatever that was. Had
I
he
don't
leaned
remember.
into it that when it first happened,
Okay, yeah.
because remember it happened and then went away, and then this all came up
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
of the supposed campaign money that went into it. So
Well,
had he
but
leaned
the
into it,
lawfare started because I've for anyone who's new, I said way back when in one of our first episodes when we were talking about Trump that I would not, I refused to vote for him in 2016. But because I recognized that the lawfare had already started, I did vote for him in 2020
Mhm.
because I wanted an attorney general to look into this stuff and put a stop to this lawfare that had already started. And so I don't think it would have changed the lawfare, but it definitely would have changed the perception of the lawfare.
Yeah, and that's percentages of a point, which is
Hmm.
what this election is going to come down to.
Hmm.
It's going to be 50.1 versus 49.8. It's going to be close. Well, I mean, take out for Jill Stein or whatever. Cornel West is still in it, or the votes where RFK is still on the ballot and people don't know why he's still on, not on there in some places, right?
Hmm.
So I think any real RFK follower though would know what he's doing because they tend to be
Yeah.
really in tune.
Those, I think the kind of person that would have supported him in the first place are paying attention.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to walk into the ballot booth and go, oh, hey, RFK Jr. is still on the ballot. I'll vote for him because I don't like either of these other two people and have no
Mhm.
clue of what he has said on the matter. Yeah. But back to the Rufo piece and where my ultimate point here is I know I've used Dawkins as my whipping boy just because he's a fun punching bag. But this is exactly what I was ranting about with Dawkins is Rufo saying, hey, it's just realism and maybe this is a good thing. This is Dawkins saying, oh my gosh, I don't understand why we can't have, Christmas, why we can't have cultural Christianity. Because when you take away the actual belief, then there's no there there. If you take away that moral ideal, you can acknowledge that politicians have always been scumbags and that politicians are always going to let you down. But if you then say, so we just shouldn't worry about it, well, then where you're going is this right here. Whoops, wrong button. So this is from Scott Rasmussen, who incidentally, if you see Rasmussen polling, it's no longer Scott Rasmussen. He sold it years ago. They're still one of the better ones, but they still have problems now. So Scott Rasmussen has now gone off and he does his own thing. And he is still one of the more uh, credible pollsters because he's very transparent and he's very serious about his work and making sure that he is simply finding the data, not creating, back to the N word, a narrative, which is what most polls are used for now, is to create a narrative. Rasmussen actually gives a damn about the truth. And that's why he got into polling and that's why he does this. Well, he just did a poll that came out this week. So this is from September 18th. Um, that he did this group, his RMG Research, which is his new polling group, did this poll for something called the Napolitan Institute. And the headline here, 17% say America would be better off if Trump had been killed. So the desensitization of some Americans following the second assassination attempt of former President Trump is alarming. 17% of voters believe America would have been better off if former President Trump had been killed in last week's assassination attempt. The figure includes 28% of Democrats who say that America would have been better off if Trump had been assassinated. Another 24% were not sure. Fewer than half, 48% of Democrats, could bring themselves to say that America would not be better off if the opposing party's candidate for president had been assassinated. Scott Rasmussen, president of RMG Research, said, quote, "It is hard to imagine a greater threat to democracy," and aside from me here, the phrase the Democrats love to use about Trump and the right in general, "a greater threat to democracy than expressing a desire to have your political opponent murdered." Despite 2 assassination attempts in 2 months, just over half of all Democrats, 51%, don't see a need to increase Trump's security detail. Among all voters, 62% think Trump's security detail should be increased and 32% disagree. 49% of Democrats thinks it's at least somewhat likely that Trump himself or the Trump campaign was involved with the assassination attempt, with 21% saying it was very likely.
So
52.
I just did some math real quick. Oh, hold on. Let me actually messed up. Let me do this again. 81. If we take voting numbers from the last election times the amount of Democrats that say it would be better off if he's dead. That's if we just take so we'll say all the voters that voted Democrat times that 28%. That's 22.5 million people that think he would be better off dead. Of that 2.5 million people, let's take the average rate of psychopathy in the United States. Pretty close to 1 million people are psychopaths that have that view. And that's if you're not assuming, which I hate mathematical models for assumption, if you're not assuming that more of them would be Democrat than Republican. So we'll say it's 50-50. So approximately 1 million people are adults, can buy a gun, and are psychopathic enough to kill somebody and think the world would be better off if this person's dead. The fact that we've only had 2, good job, America. Fuck.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
52% of Republicans think it's at least somewhat likely that the Democrat Party or the Harris campaign was involved, with 28% saying it's very likely. These results are the latest evidence of how polarized the electorate has become this election season. Voters for both Trump and Harris overwhelmingly say they can't understand how a reasonable person could vote for Trump or Harris. Upon reviewing the data, Rasmussen noted that, quote, "I continue to believe that America's best days are still to come. However, for years, I've been saying that things will get worse before they get better. These numbers suggest that the phase of getting worse is clearly upon us." This is, to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, a banana republic if you can keep it, madam. This is death of a republic kind of stuff. This is death of a culture kind of stuff. When you want to talk about S-hole countries and we have a viewer and a commenter who lives in one of those that he himself has called an S-hole country. Why? Why is it like that? Because there was another one recently that I can't remember who it was, a guy who was in a Siberian prison who just happened to die. Totally just because he got old and stuff. It wasn't because he was tortured to death or anything. No. That is what people like Putin do. The The boogeyman for the left and the Democrats right now is Russia, 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 Putin, Putin, Putin. And one of the reasons he is so terrible is because he doesn't just silence his opposition, he permanently silences them. And you're agreeing with that. You're siding with that. You're saying that's okay because we're so good and our opposition is so terrible.
Which cracks me up when the Hill released as a center organization. No, they're not center anymore. They were bought out and now they are completely not center, saying, "Oh, 100 of the top business leaders in the country are supporting Harris." I'm like, all you people that want a democratic socialist society, does that not tell you something? That the top
Mhm.
business leaders in the country are supporting this guy? Go to Chris Cuomo's rant about the people in the suites at the DNC. They are not the party they're telling you they are. They are the oligarchy.
Mhm.
The only billionaire that is supporting Trump, or the only couple billionaires, are Sachs and Elon Musk. Everybody else, whether they're pharmaceutical, whether they're labor unions, whether they're whatever industry, corn industry, everything is supporting the Democratic side because they know it's actually truly a fascist state that's coming. And when we break down fascism, it is corporate government collusion. In a functioning democratic society, in a functioning republic, the people check the politicians check the market is beholden to the people. And in two cases, the people are the answer. In what we have is the politicians are beholden to the corporations. The people think they elect the politicians, but they don't. The corporations elect the politicians. So it is corporate government collusion. We've had it since Woodrow Wilson. We've been a fascist state since then, and we pretended otherwise because literally Hitler. That's where we've lived.
Mhm. And my point is that whatever the outcome of this election, we need to stop focusing so dogmatically on the characters of the election and on even of the election itself and start looking at how did we get here? Because I actually agree. So I clicked
Slowly
on,
and all of a sudden, that's how we got there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So here is um here are the details of that line about reasonable people voting for the other side. So, 81% of Vice President Harris voters could not understand why a reasonable person would vote for former President Donald Trump. A Neapolitan News Service survey also found 72% of voters could not understand why a reasonable person would vote for Harris. So,
Trump
and
voters. You skipped the Trump on that sentence.
but Trump voters,
72% of Trump voters. Yeah.
Trump voters, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and
72% of voters would mean it was a slam dunk.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Good.
and you can see the pie charts of yes, no, not sure, and it is absolutely overwhelming. And I can agree with that to a point, or rather, what I see looking at both candidates and their flaws is I can't understand how a reasonable person would wholeheartedly and full-throatedly support either of these candidates. I can more easily understand how a reasonable person could not vote for one or both of these candidates. Here's the problem, though. We live in unreasonable times. When you look at the numbers right before that, when you look at the fact that after this second attempt, the media isn't even trying to hide anymore. There were for about 5 minutes there after the first one, the media were at least pronouncing platitudes about lowering the temperature. They immediately, Lester Holt, the head anchor for NBC News, his report, sorry, his report on this was about Trump's rhetoric inflaming things.
Mm-hmm.
So well, she shouldn't have been wearing that and in that part of town, is essentially,
Yeah, I've
not
seen that
essentially, that
analogy.
that
Yeah.
that is exactly what the left is doing right now. Is he had it coming. He had it coming, and or don't miss next time. We live in unreasonable times. And so I can understand how someone would vote for an unreasonable candidate. That's probably what I'm going to do, is vote for someone who I consider unreasonable, which is Trump. I don't like him personally. I don't like his temperament. I don't like some of his policies even. However, the other side is literally trying to kill him. That's a problem. That is, again, a banana republic if you can keep it. Is if you allow the side that is doing this to win, then yeah, most important of election of our time, the country is over if you affirm that, or if you allow it to be affirmed. You can think all you want. I don't like the guy. I don't like this or that, but he and his side aren't out there actively trying to kill the opposition.
And
And
add
I
to
go,
that what you hear. This is actually a Harvard review, if you can read the small print there.
oh dear.
Political leaning of misinformation experts. So the people that were responsible for recording what happened. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of variance there.
For
So
those just listening, this is coming from the PBS website.
yeah,
So way left.
way left, and they're reporting that, yeah, we're there. This is like the Time magazine article that's just telling you what they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is yeah, our fact checkers agree with the side that we don't fact check. But one argument would say, but that's because it's the side that tells the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the other argument would be that they determine the truth by the side they align with. So you pick yours. I just gave you the two options. Uh, I know where I stand. That because especially since we know what selective memory is all about when it comes to your cognitive ability. So yeah, your bias is going to be extremely important in what you report. There you go. I thought that
Mm-hmm.
chart was actually very telling on what we see, especially since everything, the big term, the buzzword is fact check right now.
Yep. All right. So I have a I have a segue into a more lighthearted topic we can end on, that I almost brought up when we were talking Wheel of Time, because one of the things we kind of talk about and rant about there are the cultures, and the way that Robert Jordan was able to craft these very believable cultures so that you knew where people were coming from and why they thought the way they thought and why they acted the way they acted, because culture matters.
Hold on. Are you going to football now?
Mm-hmm.
Let me get ahead of that because I can actually bring what I had with the
Oh,
report, the
yes.
research papers into football. So I know which one to bring up first then because I'll bring up the football one last. Uh, that one. Which one are you? Okay, so you'll be last. Okay, so reading research. Topic number 3, if you're keeping track. Reading research. Culture is downstream of politics, as you were just bringing up.
Mm-hmm.
And where does the culture come from? And a lot of it comes from academia right now. And as Gad Saad would say, a lot of these things are so stupid, an academic has to come up with it, right? So it's I'm in this social psychology class and I'm trying to keep my integrity while still getting a good grade. So I'm thinking I'm going to get a B this semester, which B is best in grad school, so you still pass. But I am holding to my principles while still trying to navigate the class. So everything she lectures, I am like locked in visually, auditory, tactile with the way I take notes and stuff because I do it by hand. And I'm locked into the lecture because what I've noticed in grad school here is the lectures don't match the politics. When they start talking about their opinions, then it actually goes off the rails and contradicts the actual literature. But we have to review a lot of papers, and the teacher selects the paper, and they're very married to them. One of the questions on the first little, this is what we're kind of looking for, and when you do your review and everything, one of them was, what are the limitations to this study? It turns out, as having turned in several papers with limitations to the studies, they don't want to hear the limitations to the studies. They want you to say, there's nothing there. This is perfect. This, yeah, your conclusion based on this is just right. So we're going to go into the limitations of some of these studies. So the first one, Heath and I kind of went over this after we recorded last time because we didn't have time. But the posing while black, the impact of race expansion poses. Okay, so the main thing here was expansive poses, which if you don't know is like making yourself look bigger versus making yourself diminutive. So I'll bring the pictures up that they have as examples for that. So do I need to zoom that in, or is that good enough?
I think that's good enough.
Okay, so expansive, you see the guy's elbows are out, and constrictive, you see they're in, and he's kind of got a very
Hunched posture.
hunched posture. And basically, you're making yourself smaller, you're making yourself bigger, and that affects the way people see you. And the proper conclusion to some of these was, or the proper data that came up from some of these was that expansive actually came across as more
Aggressive.
no, no,
Wasn't
no,
that the
no.
word they use?
We're getting to that. No,
Okay.
competent. So across all race, the expansive posture came across as more competent, which is why you see it in leadership roles, right? People come up and they teach you to put your chest out, put your shoulders back, have your arms to your side. So if you can actually see this, you can see the difference between where they have expansive black people, expansive white people, constrictive black and constrictive white. Now, where the aggression comes in is when they did a secondary question to it was black more aggressive and expansive white was it turned out by the surveys less aggressive. Okay, so on the surface that says, well, people have a stereotype, right? It is culture, it is society that says the same thing with black and white. People are going to say black people are more aggressive. That was their conclusion. They ran with it, and it actually informs policy, which is why this is important, right? So all of these things inform policy. But if you are able to see this and you look at it, look at expansive white versus expansive black. You got a normal stature white dude. He's probably about 6 foot, maybe 185 pounds, dad bodish, kind of look to him. Look at expansive black. That guy is jacked. That V shape, I want that V shape. Okay. This dude is jacked beyond measure. Now, expansive white on the standing behind table, that one's pretty close. Standing in front of table, again, a skinny white dude versus a jacked black dude. This guy is a defensive lineman somewhere. This dude is big. Are you going to vote one more aggressive than the other? Probably. Look at sitting behind the table. The white dude his elbows are out beyond his midline, but they're barely out. There's no space between his body and his arms. The sitting behind the table black, his elbows are exaggerated out. So when we talk about expansive postures, is it going to seem aggressive if it's exaggerated? That's a question. That's a question we should ask when it comes to the literature, right? Is this a hole in the result? If I'm expansive, is it one result? If I'm exaggerated expansive, is it another? If I have my chest out with good posture, do I get a result? Or if I have my chest out and I'm puffing my chest out like a rooster, is that considered more aggressive? Look at sitting. The degree of difference between expansive black and expansive white is probably about 40% in how far apart their feet are. People talk about man spread, right? There is a man spread in one, and then there's a super exaggerated man spread in the other. So these pictures were used to make these assessments in these random individuals. So that's one area of problematic procedure. They were not uniformed. The sitting is the easiest one. They could have had a piece of tape on the ground, put your foot on this.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we consider expansive. This is what we do not consider expansive. You could have 2 tapes in the middle for constrictive, 2 tapes just outside the midline for expansive. You could have made this uniform. The other part is, how did they judge what was neutral? Because they used a process to do this. They used grad students to research assistants, excuse me, to judge what was neutral. They were all grad students. They were all research assistants. They were recruited to judge on basis of, is it racially unambiguous? So is it actually black or white? Or is it like someone who's like, oh, I don't know, they might be mixed, you know? So they did that. They did facial expression. Was it neutral? They did all of these measures, including what was this person just intimidating, period. Why is it important that that's grad students, Heath?
Because that's not the real world.
No, why is it more important that that's grad students?
Not only is it not the real world, but they're bought into the program.
Yeah, so if I'm judging a white person, I can be free with my judgment, right? If I am judging a black person, even if it's anonymous, I am trained to say, nope, that's a normal guy.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he's freaking the Hulk right there on the upper left, right? So yeah, they're not allowed to negatively judge anybody of certain melanin compositions, right? So you've already skewed the data by having your judges be biased unconsciously. And yes, unconscious bias exists, but it's okay in some situations. It's not okay in this. So my proposition to the teacher was, we should have had AI. Now that we have the technology to this, we should do that. We should replicate this study with AI, where they're exactly the same except the face and the skin color, right? So we could actually replicate this in a way that is more neutral. Now, the other part of that is, let's look at where do we have study population? Participants. Here we go. Mean 20, a little over 20 years old, but here's the important part. Of the 111 participants, what is that demographic?
84 females.
84 females out of 111 participants. And you're judging aggressive looking stature from young females who are taught to be scared of men.
The same young females that would rather be in the forest with a bear.
Yeah. Are they going to rate aggression higher in the jacked dude or the guy that looks like their stepbrother? You know, Pornhub would like you to say that they're attracted to their stepbrother, but aggression, on aggression standards, they're going to think the big jack dude, no matter what color, is going to be more aggressive. Because that's how females work. Cross-sex mind reading. He could be a big teddy bear. We don't know, but they don't know that either, except they prefer bears. So maybe this is skewed in the other direction. Maybe it actually is more powerful than they think it is. I don't know. We don't know because we didn't compare apples to apples. And that's my point. This is where studies go wrong. This is where you can't be married to the result, because it's different between being a cynic and a skeptic. And I think every scientific team needs the skeptic, because that person is the person that's going to take any holes away from your research. Because people are going to run with this and say, studies suggest Americans think that black people are more aggressive, even though everything is equal. But not everything was equal.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need to take that into account, or else you're subject to that criticism. If you have all of the things I just talked about, you are subject to the criticism of the other side.
So here's my anecdote about this that actually goes along with it, and it's funny because I'd forgotten the AI part that you mentioned. I'd
Yeah,
forgotten
we
that was
have the
part of this.
technology. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of AI,
We also had pieces of tape on the ground. We could have used that to say, do this pose
yeah,
exactly
to
this
make it
way.
better.
Yeah.
So my daughter's English professor is requiring that they all buy this AI writing assistant to write their essays. And she is incensed on general principle of one. Oh, hold on a second. You're supposed to be teaching us how to write better. That is the point of an English class, is that we are supposed to be learning how to write essays and write them better. And it gets even worse still because part of the point of the AI is it's also a grading assistant. So not only does he not want to do the work of teaching them, but then he doesn't want to do the work of grading them either.
Which is funny because one of the things my department is doing right is we have to do our essays in person in writing, and they've actually made the computer labs where they're not a bunch of computer labs where they're not connected to the internet, so so you don't have to handwrite them. You can type them out, but they're still you.
So yeah,
It,
I told this to we had him on the show way back when we were talking COVID. My friend Steven, and his degree is he's got a lit degree, and I because I'm a guy and our idea of fun is causing mental anguish to our friends, I shared this with him so that his brain would explode. And that was his point of, are you effing kidding me? They're going nuts out here. He lives in California. They're going nuts out here trying to keep AI away from the kids. And this professor is demanding they use it. And so I also I made the point to my daughter because basically one of her first or second essays was it was supposed to be about using this AI tool, and her essay was going to be this is why you shouldn't use the AI tool. And I'm like, okay, well, you might get a bad grade for that, but so if you're okay with that, then go for it. But one of the things I mentioned to her is the very first thing you learn in computer science, and the only thing I remember because I was terrible at coding and it broke my brain, but the very first thing you learn is the phrase garbage in, garbage out. And that is especially important for anyone else in that class who's like her, who's just doing this for their gen eds and then is going to go into a hard science. So you're telling me to use this thing. I have no idea what its methodology is. I don't know how it constructs what it spits out. So you're asking me to use this blindly. And then when I told her that, then she went off on a rant of, oh no, it gets worse yet because there was a study that was used as a proof of why this is good and why you should use it. And she actually looked into the study, not just reading the headline, not just reading the abstract. And one, it wasn't a third party, it was done by the company itself.
I
And
decided to jump on Gemini real quick while you were talking.
oh, yes, lovely. Um,
Yeah. So, what are the harms of gender affirming care? Well, it's important. The majority of medical professionals
the
support gender
overwhelming
affirming care.
majority of medical,
So,
yeah,
yeah, ask the second question. What are the benefits of gender affirming care? Oh, we've got a nice long list here. So,
yeah.
and they both answers link you to the Human Rights Campaign, which is funded by who?
Soros, isn't it, or Gates? Okay,
Yes. It
all
is his
right.
primary nonprofit. Yes.
So she actually went off. My daughter went off on a rant of what I was going to talk about, which is that as you do when we see the studies say, the first thing you do is you find the actual study and you go down to their methodology. Why? Because frequently you can tell right from that whether this is good science or garbage science. And so this study that showed that this AI assistant writing tool was good was one, funded by the company itself, and two, it was all from voluntary responses from people who used it. So the methodology was already awful. And that was just to show why you should use it. but there's still no methodology for what is the algorithm here? How does it learn? And thus, how does it choose what to say? Because if I don't know that, then I am just a drone here. This isn't actually helping me. This is Google, give me the answer. Okay, here is the answer. I am done. Turn in paper. So this, the creep here of what we have been ranting about with these, you know, higher level studies and how they say something to push the inward again, the narrative. But then when you actually dig down and look at how the study was constructed, you realize, oh, this is crap. This is an answer in search of evidence, not looking at evidence and then deciding what that means the answer is. And this is because academia is one of the most corrupted of corrupt institutions that we have, and culture matters. You are in, to your point with bringing up the fact that that particular paper you showed was based on post grads establishing the baseline, and these are people who are fully bought into this culture of a white person can never criticize a person of color ever because that's racist.
Yeah. My big point from that is this is downstream from everything you hear. It's like, oh, systemic racism, right? This is a data point they use, but the data point itself is flawed. And there are ways to make it better. We brought up the IAT studies where it's like, oh, well, black faces, white faces, aggression, da 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 da, and you go through and you either pass or fail on if you have implicit bias, right? But then they switched the face to have the exact same face with a hat with your favorite baseball team on it versus the rival team, and it completely washed out the racial bias. So yeah, this study exists and it says this certain thing, but what if we modify one thing? And my modification isn't even to add another variable like they did with the hats. My modification is to make things more equal.
Take away variables.
To take away variables. Yeah, so that's big. Now let me give the other study to segue to sports here. So this is another one I had to do. If I'll bring it up here. Can uniform color aggression? Quasi-experimental evidence from professional ice hockey. It's actually football and ice hockey. I don't know why they just said ice hockey in the title, but they were talking about black uniforms create aggression. Okay. Well, maybe I brought up the wrong one here. I did bring up the wrong one. Okay. Let me get the right one. But as I'm bringing up the correct one, they what they did was they did 4 little mini studies, and the first 3 involved sports teams and the color of their uniform. And the first one was just to kind of separate out which teams were considered to have predominantly black coloring in their uniforms. And then the second one was to compare penalty rates with the teams that were considered to have predominantly black uniform coloring. And then they made conclusions based on that. And the third one involved which teams switch their uniform color mid-season so they can kind of get rid of the I think I got it now. Hold on. Nope, that's the same one. Shit. So what they did was they basically drew a conclusion that black uniforms cause aggression. Wearing a black uniform causes aggression. Now, the fourth study was a little better because they took random people and put them in a game where they chose different studying aggression is really hard because there's problematic things from a uh, uh, ethical standpoint. You can't actually have people like be aggressive at each other during the study. So what they did was they had them choose games out of a total of 15. They had to choose five, and there were some that were more physically aggressive than others. And the people wearing the black uniforms, so they did it just neutrally in their first little meetup, and then they had them join a team, and they would wear either a white or a black uniform, and then they, as a team, would reselect what games they would play. And they had their control was the original one where they came in their street clothes, and then the experimental was the white versus black uniforms. And the people in the black uniforms did choose more aggressive games. So that one's a little bit better because at least you have a one-to-one comparison and a control. So the fourth one I give a little bit of credit to, but the first three, they're looking at these teams. And my first thought reading the introduction to this damn thing was the Raiders. Thinking Al Davis, just win, baby. And I'm like, is it the black uniform? Or is it a selection bias in who you recruit?
Mm.
I mean, he had Romanowski. He had all of these. His kicker was Janikowski, the most based kicker in the history of the NFL, right? The guy kicked a 62-yard field goal, and when interviewed about it, were you nervous? He said, "No, I had a good buzz." This is the kind of people that they recruited for the Raiders because they wanted that mentality.
Mhm.
So is it the black uniform or is it the organization? And inexplicably, the Bears were on the list, and I'm like, that's not black, that's dark blue. But I'm colorblind, and I know that. But at the same time, they have a mentality: go hard. The Minnesota Vikings, the Purple People Eaters, right? They had this mentality in the organization. So you can't compare the penalty rates of these teams with a black uniform and say the black uniform caused this. Now, what you could say is people who would develop that organization would be more likely to pick black.
Mhm.
That you could say. That would be a hypothesis. That would be kind of semi correlated with the evidence. But you can't say putting on the black uniform causes the aggression. What you would have to do is do a longitudinal study of that exact team. And when they're wearing their black uniforms versus their road, which would be white uniforms, commit more penalties. That would be a better study. But what we got was black uniforms cause more aggression. So therefore they commit more penalties, and therefore they're the more aggressive ones. And then they used this is where she asked for, outside perspective that you can bring to the class, but she didn't like mine because I work with sports. And she was like, "Oh, but there's two teams that halfway through the season they switched uniforms and they became more aggressive." And I'm like, yeah, that's because it was probably the organization saying, we're going to do this. We're going to play harder. We're going to be more aggressive. We're going to da 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 da. And we're going to switch your uniforms to look meaner. That's different than we just switched uniforms and things happened, right?
So speaking of sports analogies here, you just made me think, hey, Ideals, do you care about hockey? Do you follow hockey? Because there's an interesting story I remember
He
from way
he,
back in
seem,
the
he seems like
90s.
a rugby guy to me. I don't
Yeah.
know,
But so with after the wall came down, then there was this influx of
or
Russian
MMA,
and
MMA.
Eastern European hockey players into the NHL. And in the 90s, when the Detroit Red Wings were dominating, they had a line change that they would do where they would put out five Russians on the ice. So it was all Russians out on the ice, and they would skate circles around people. And it was, oh, because they're Russians, so they're good skaters. And I remember reading a story about no, why. There was a specific reason why. It was again because there was a cultural thing there. One of the things that they would do in Russia when they got bored and it was winter for 11 and a half months is instead of just playing hockey, they would put boards around a soccer field, flood it, and then they would go play soccer on ice skates. That was one of the reasons these Russian players were so good on skates because they didn't just play hockey. They went out there on a bigger field doing a different kind of thing where you had to use your feet while you're skating, and it made them phenomenal skaters because of the culture there, because this was a thing that those people did routinely, and it led to an effect. And if you just look at the surface level and you never go, okay, but why?
Yeah, and this is where the science goes awry because there's a narrative here. You said the inward, the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm still not brave enough to use the meme, but it's a guy that has his name is Nasser, and apparently World of Warcraft put asterisks over ass. And if you can visualize that in your head, and in the bottom he says World of Warcraft is censoring ass and it made it worse. So it's in asterisk, 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 ER. I haven't been brave enough to use that meme yet, but it might be the one for this one. But
All right.
no, this is the thing, because there's a narrative here. These two studies, look at it. There's it's not accidental she picked these for two separate totally different topics in the class. One is people think black people are more aggressive in the same poses, even though they weren't in the same poses. And they weren't apple to apples as far as physique or anything like that. And there's another one that is really reaching at straws to say people associate aggression with black people. So we have two studies from completely different topics that are saying Americans think black is aggressive. Go down the road how that's going to play out politically. Okay, so it is a social construct that we think this thing. And then when someone on the right says, well, look at the crime statistics, they say, see, you're racist because of this social construct, because systemic racism. Remember, systemic racism is the underlying thing that we can't see. It just exists, right? Like God, it is just there, and it governs everything we do. And as we used as one of our thumbnails one time, I got a ticket. I was told this white there would be this privilege thing, right? I'm white and I got a ticket. I was told there would be privileges. Yeah. It is this narrative that is being put out, and they put it in the literature so they can say studies say. But look at the problem with these studies. There are massive problems with these studies. I just gave two, the pictures versus each other, and the fact that no, there is a mentality in organizations and sports that say we are going to be aggressive. And it changes everything. The color black may be incorporated with it. Say Al Davis said, we're going to be this thing. We're going to call it the black hole, and we're going to have these black uniforms, black and silver. We're the Raiders. Maybe that has something to do with it, but it's top down, not bottom up. But they want you to say it's a bottom up thing, because then they can look at me, who came from absolutely nothing, and say you still have privilege because you don't have this mentality based around you.
It's almost like culture's what matters, as I've been ranting about this whole episode. And this was the example I wanted to use. Justin Fields. Justin Fields drafted by the Chicago Bears in the first round, 11th overall in the 2021 NFL draft, not that long ago, 2021. He was already figured to be a draft bust. He couldn't play. He couldn't play at the NFL level. Well, lo and behold, he is now the Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback. And yes, it's a very small sample size of only 2 games, but I've got Pro Football Reference up here, and you look at his career, the previous 3 years of his record, 12-28 with Chicago, 2-0 so far with the Steelers. But more to the point, a 60.7 completion rating versus now 69.8%. 1 TD and 0 interceptions versus 41 TDs and 30 interceptions with Chicago. So that's not a good ratio for anyone who doesn't know football. Almost a 1-to-1. That's not good. Why? Well, let's go to Pittsburgh and their coaches, because I think this is the best illustration of the culture of the Pittsburgh Steelers, is the fact that they have a way of doing things and they're going to do it. And you go back to 1969, I believe this was when the current family, I forget their name, I think this is when they bought the team and took over. And since then, since 1969, Pittsburgh has had three coaches. Chuck Noll, 69 to 91, Bill Cowher, 92 to 06, and then Mike Tomlin, 07 to the present.
Rooney is the
Rooney, there you go,
yeah.
the Rooney family. And you look at their records and they're very respectable. The win percentage for Noll was 56% regular season, 66% in the postseason. Cowher was 62% and 57%, and Tomlin is 63% and 44%. And
yeah, and that's also let me put a little asterisk with that 44%. That's during the New England and Kansas City dynasties.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So and they're in the same conference, so he has to make it through them to and add in the Colts, who had decent, they were always kind of in the postseason, even if they didn't have great success with Manning. So you add in the Colts there, and he's always got to get by them. And you add in the fact that there's a lot more parity now during his tenure. So the point being, oh, this guy's a bust. Well, then he goes somewhere where the culture doesn't stink. And holy crap, this guy looks like an actual professional. It's almost like the culture matters. And that it has nothing to do with where he came from. It has nothing to do with the color of his skin. No, he went to a place that sucked.
All right, let's contrast that with the Chicago Bears, where Fields just came from. And I asked Google Gemini, because it's not political, it should give me an honest answer. Gemini says, as of 2024, the Chicago Bears have had 20 quarterbacks since Jim McMahon retired. This includes notable names like Jay Cutler, Trubisky, and Fields. So yeah, those are the ones that lasted longer too. So since Jim McMahon back in, was it 1985 when the Bears won that Super Bowl, Walter Payton, Jim McMahon, and the Fridge, so, since then they've had 20 different quarterbacks. Contrast that with what you just brought up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. What have they had? They've had, Roethlisberger was there for what, 12, 13 years?
Yeah, long time.
Somewhere around there. I know they had that little bit in between where they had what was the crossover guy that was like a slot receiver plus a
the guy from Colorado?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm blanking on his name. His nickname was Slash because he was so quick and agile, and he was in the 90s a little bit, and Cowher had success with him. And then O'Donnell was one of their quarterbacks in the 90s when Slash, Cordell Stewart.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think those were their two quarterbacks in the 90s primarily.
Yeah. So I mean, realistically, had a lot of the consistency there. And Mason Rudolph lasted a while. Trubisky came in for a little bit. A lot of these former Bears quarterbacks, by the way, because Cordell Stewart was a former Bear. But then they get Fields, and he's in there for what, 3 years? Or how many seasons was that you brought up on that graphic?
That was 3 years in Chicago, and this is his first year in Pittsburgh.
So 20 quarterbacks in the same time that it took, what, 5 quarterbacks maybe in Pittsburgh, because of consistency, because of development, because of pre-planning, because of building a team around the person, not just saying we're going to put everything on this person and they can be the scapegoat for the blame of all our problems, just like they do in Cleveland. We had that for a bit here in Houston when we were under the Bill O'Brien era. And he's doing well at Boston College. He should be a college coach. But when he was a pro coach, he had that mentality of temporality.
This is you bring up the Texans, and this is why I have faith in them now, because the after the old owner died and it was kind of a mess for a while, and now the son has decided, no, I I want a winning football team. What does that take? Let me get the GM from New England, and let me hire this guy who was part of our organization when we had some success and who cares about this organization, and let's institute a culture that gives a damn about winning.
And here's some insider baseball on that, because here in Houston we called him Tommy Boy ever since his father died, and he was just not doing the job. We call him Tommy Boy. Rick Smith had some sort of dirt on him because he kept staying around as the GM. Easterby had some sort of dirt on him because I don't even know what he did for the corporation, but he was messing up everything. And what happened? This is where grassroots stuff comes in. So we can talk politics or sports or business. Basically, everybody sold their season tickets or just dropped them. People stopped renewing their season tickets. The Texans, from 2002, when they were in their inception, to the middle of the BOB era, which was late 2010, past 2020, right? It was up until the middle of that era, was sold out every game, even when we sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody let their season tickets lapse, and all of a sudden it was a 50% capacity from then on out. And oh my gosh, did that not spark a change? What was the change? Money. Money was the change, because it got to a point where the business of running the Houston Texans was a liability instead of a profit.
It's funny that you bring that up, because I was just about the reason I brought up the Texans is because I was going to contrast with drive up 45 to Dallas, and you don't have a football team, you
Let
have
me
a franchise.
let me tell you about Dalton Schultz then. Schultz, excuse me, Dalton Schultz. He was interviewed about what's the difference between being a Cowboy and a Texan.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, here we get to business and we do our job. In Dallas, it was, what do you do in front of the camera? And there was glitz and glamour and all this. And it made me think Rocky 3. Rocky 3, Clubber
Yep.
Lang versus Rocky, the Rock, when he was in his, all the cameras going off and he'd skip a little rope and then smile and do an interview and all this stuff. And Clubber Lang was in his basement doing pull-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the Cowgirls always lose in the playoffs, because you got to fight the heavyweights.
It's been 30 years since they've been to the Super Bowl, and yet this is where the culture matters,
Wait, was it
because
96? Didn't they go in
it's
96?
about 30 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Not quite
get,
30 years. I'll
getting
give you a little
close.
credit. See, I'm trying to help you.
Get
I'm trying to help
getting
you.
close.
Yeah.
Um, they haven't even made it to the conference championship game since that last season
What have
that
they
they made
won,
it to
like
the Super Bowl.
two playoff games since
And
then?
they've only
Yeah.
won a couple of playoff
The
games. Yeah.
Texans have won more playoff games since the last Cowboys Super Bowl than the
Mm-hmm.
Cowboys have won. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yet, so why? Why has that been going on for damn near 30 years? Well, because I think this is a big point. The Dallas Cowboys are one of the top five richest sports franchises in the world. Think about what that means. Jerry Jones has gotten his business up there with teams like Real Madrid, who have a way bigger base of fans, because they have a worldwide base of fans. And as much as the NFL has tried, the NFL isn't really a worldwide brand yet. It's known, and people might watch the Super Bowl just to say, hey, big game, let's see what happens here. But it's not a worldwide brand. And yet the wealth of this franchise is up there with teams like Real Madrid. There's there's no incentive for him to win. Contrast that with Pittsburgh, that is a football team. That's all that ownership cares about. Green Bay is literally owned by the townspeople.
Mm-hmm.
All they care about is their team winning. And so they do.
I had a client that was from that area, and she lived down here for a while, and unfortunately she had to move again, so I don't have her anymore. But The sweet lady in her mid 60s with some neurological issues that we had to work around, but she was a stockholder in the Green Bay Packers, and on her bucket list was to go to a Green Bay game in the snow. And we a bunch of us with the gym put together money to get her to one, and unfortunately it didn't snow, but we got her in the stadium in winter, so she was at least cold. But it didn't snow, so we got partly there, but it was a good little venture for us. But yeah, the people of those organizations believe in the team. They the and let me, I'm trying to rephrase this here. Not only do the people believe in the team in a cult like manner, but the organizations uh, listen to the people. So, Green Bay is always trying to be good. You never hear this is a rebuilding year. You never hear we're gonna play on our successes of the past for a while. They're always trying to win. That's why they're always in it.
Mhm.
Green Bay is like the Green Bay and Pittsburgh are actually mirror images of each other on each side of the conferences, because name a time Green Bay has missed the playoffs, but by a lot. I can't remember a time when Green Bay's missed the playoffs by a lot. There's been times where they missed it, but they've been competitive the whole way, and a lot of times they played spoiler in that. And look at quarterbacks. We just talked about Chicago 20 since McMahon. Well, we had Favre, then we had Aaron Rodgers, and then we have Jordan Love. And that's the extent of you and I in our mid 40s watching football.
Mhm.
Who was before Favre?
I don't even remember.
Because it was so long ago. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah,
because he started there in the early 90s.
yeah. Because I mean, Aaron Rodgers won his Super Bowl in the late 90s. So Favre was there for how many years?
I think Aaron Rodgers' Super Bowl was in the 2000s.
Was it?
Yeah.
I can remember where I watched it, but I don't remember what year it was.
Anyway, the point being that culture matters, and it's we're ranting about things that matter here big time when you're talking about a culture of political opponents being attempted assassinations and people saying, yeah, this is fine, holy crap. But you can step away from the deep dark things that really matter, and you know sticking with Green Bay, when the Lombardi trophy. Well, when Lombardi went there, the team stank. And one of his famous phrases is uh, winning is a habit. Unfortunately, so
Yep.
is losing.
So according to Gemini, since we're playing the AI game, there's been four starting quarterbacks for the Green Bay Packers since 1987. Majkowski, Favre, Rodgers, and now Love. So
Yeah.
I mean, there were
So,
individual games where there were a different starting quarterback, but at the same time, because of injury or whatever. But as far as franchise quarterbacks, there have been four since 1987. So
yeah.
so before the Cowboys started being sucky, the Packers had four quarterbacks.
2010, the 2010 season. So February 2011, over the Pittsburgh Steelers was Rodgers' Super Bowl win.
Okay, so I'm remembering where I was when I watched that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um, but to Lombardi's point, they had gotten in the habit of losing, and they had to break that habit and make winning a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And to achieve that, there's this famous speech where he walks into the locker room. I think it may have been the first day, and he says, "We have to get back to basics, way basic, gentlemen. This is a football."
Mm-hmm.
That's how basic it was. Is no, we are tearing it all down, and we are starting over with this is a football.
Yeah,
Now
he
let's build from
isn't he
there.
also the one that said, "Show me a good loser, and I'll show you a loser."
Yeah, I think that was it too.
So I got a good Packers story because one of my former mentors, Scott Keller, he played for Indianapolis and Green Bay way back in the early '80s and stuff, and he he was a rookie or close to it. He was a very young athlete when Green Bay got their new strength and conditioning facility with all the fancy new machines and all the glitz and glamour. And he was in there working out with the other young guys, and Ray Nitschke walked in. And this will probably tell you the year it was. It was on the radio was the new hit. She's got the look. She's got the look. Apparently that was on the radio, and Nitschke walked in, looked around, listened to the radio for a second, said, "What is this fucking bullshit?" And he kicked over one of the machines, knocked over something else, said, "God, you're fucking soft," and he walked out. And he never walked in that weight room again. You can do that as a future Hall of Famer, I guess. But yeah, he apparently left and went to the old weight room. And yeah, that was the mentality of the Packers back then. And
Yep.
yeah.
I don't want glitz and glamour. I want to work out in a dungeon.
Yeah. Well, you also got the old videos where blood is flowing from him and he's got a broken nose, and because someone put their hand under his face mask and cranked on it, and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
did you have anything specific about what's going on this season to go with that, or?
no, simply that this is why I made the picks that I picked, because Andy Reid, and you saw this in Philly when he didn't always have a great team. He instills a culture. Shanahan and Lynch as the GM, they instilled a culture because the 49ers through the 80s and the 90s, they were dominant, or at least like Green Bay, competitive. And then they stank for a long time. And this is one of the storied franchises of the NFL. And these guys came back in and they made it relevant again. And it is because they have a culture, and they get they get players who will buy into that culture and will execute accordingly. So, and that is a big reason why I picked a Chiefs Niners rematch, is because that's two of the best cultures in the whole league. And they've got the veterans who have been there and done that. So not only have they experienced it, but they are fully immersed in it, and then can bring up the younger guys into, this is how we do things here.
Well, and that's why two things I picked or I have a good positive outlook on the Texans, because DeMeco Ryans, not only was he an old school football player, but he's a Shanahan tree in his coaching style. But also my upset pick, if the Texans don't make it, was Pittsburgh, because I think they did a good job of bringing back the model that we saw with the early 2000s Buccaneers and Ravens. Is we're going to build an awesome team, and then we're going to bring in a veteran quarterback to take it to the next level, and we'll have a backup that's pretty damn good and similar. And so we saw with the Ravens, so people talk about this and the whole, who are the worst quarterbacks to ever win the Super Bowl? Everybody always brings up Brad Johnson and Trent Dilfer.
Mm-hmm.
We're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Brad Johnson and Trent Dilfer, but they were veterans that were brought in to an amazing team to finish the job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Pittsburgh did this year, is they have a solid defense. They've got a pretty damn good run game, and they've got a solid offensive line. And they brought in Russell Wilson, who hasn't been able to play from injury, but Justin Fields as the Trent Dilfer, to Trent Dilfer being Elvis Gerbach's backup, right? So they have that formula. And if the Texans don't make it all the way, as my homer pick, I want Pittsburgh to do it, because I'm tired of these damn quarterback contracts that are, you have to have this superstar or you can't win.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And bringing back that old school mentality that Tomlin lived through and has done before. Because look at Roethlisberger. He was a great quarterback, but he was just kind of great. He wasn't a superstar. He was enough to get the job done when everything else was clicking.
No, while he was playing, it was Favre was still playing, and then Rodgers and Manning and Brady, and those were the guys that was always talked about. And then Roethlisberger was kind of bringing up the rear of that top tier, but they won.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, his biggest strength was something that you don't want to see in a quarterback, was he was so massive that he would have 3 defensive linemen on him and he could still stand there long enough to throw the ball to somebody. because if you got three
Yeah.
guys on you, that means two guys are open. You know,
Th- this is why, so kind of my last thought here, and socking it back to the political stuff a little bit too, is this is why I wasn't sure about the Jets, because one guy isn't enough to change a bad culture. He might be able to start it, but one guy isn't enough. And
no, but it was the same formula.
no, it was the same
It's
formula,
the
but I
same
just don't
formula.
know enough about the
They had a good
Jets and
run game, good
Sala.
defense, and they
Yeah,
brought in Aaron Rodgers. He just got injured last year. Now, what
but
you have with Rodgers that's different than what you're talking about here is he can transcend a culture because he's been around for
mhm.
15 plus years.
No,
Right.
the point being about Rodgers is the reason I wasn't ready to like pick them as a spoiler is because I just don't know enough about the Jets culture to know, because they've been such a dysfunctional organization for so long that I don't know enough about Sala, and I don't know who their GM is that is putting all these pieces together to know if that's enough to change the culture. And you can't do it with just one guy. You know, there needs to be a deeper element here. Here's my illustration of that, which is one of my favorite pictures in sports. For those just listening, this is Nolan Ryan with blood all over his shirt, streaming down his lip, sticking his tongue out, and there's a big picture as he gets, he's got the ball in his glove and he's about ready to pitch. Bo Jackson, Bo frickin' Jackson hit a hard one hopper that smashed him in the face. Nolan reaches down, picks up the ball, throws it out to first. The trainer and the coach are coming out of the bench, and he darn near flips them off and tells them to get lost. And he pitches like 5 or 6 more innings because this happened early in the game. Arguably one of the top 10, if not top 5 baseball players of all time. And you're talking about a sport that's been going on since the 1880s. And it didn't matter. I mean, it mattered to him. He had tremendous success with the Rangers. I didn't turn around that organization. That organization continued to be dysfunctional until he came in with a new ownership group as one of the front office people and helped rework that culture from the top down, and then getting people, the kind of people on the bottom, like Michael Young and some other people, to help also work from the bottom up. And they were able to change that culture and finally win a playoff game for the first time ever in like 2011, 2010, 2011, when they finally had those back-to-back World Series appearances. And because just that one guy on your team isn't going to be enough. You need more people bought into the idea that culture matters, and we're going to create a culture that will produce quality.
I think yes and no. I think it can't happen bringing one person in if that person is a young draft pick. So we see that with every year with the Browns, who's going to be our savior? Every year with the Bears, who's going to be our savior? Every year with you pick your team that's chronically bad, Jacksonville or whatever. This is going to be our savior. We draft that quarterback that's going to save us. Indianapolis, they drafted Manning, and they actually went to relevance, right, with him. So they were the exception to the rule there. But look at Cleveland. They're more than 20 quarterbacks into this process because they keep drafting the savior and it's dysfunctional. But I think you have a shot if you bring in the veteran. So we just brought up Aaron Rodgers in New York, and this is one reason I think New York is going to be fighting. I actually, now that Miami lost Tua, I think New York is going to take that division, even though Buffalo is playing exceptionally better than I thought they were going to
Oh
play.
yeah, yeah.
You know, so New York has a shot to take that division because of that shift that happened with Rodgers coming out playing exceptionally well this last Thursday night.
Yeah.
You have that shot with a veteran. We saw it with Brett Favre in Minnesota. Remember, Minnesota was a joke for a long time. And Brett Favre came in, and all of a sudden he's throwing 6 touchdowns a game sometimes. And Minnesota became relevant. Randy Moss made his name under Brett Favre. Let me think of another team. What's another team where a veteran went in and just turned the Tampa Bay fucking Buccaneers? Tom Brady went down there.
I brought up the Niners earlier. Joe Montana goes to KC, and KC had been a joke for years
Yeah, and
after
beat
being
the
dominant in
Oilers
the
in the
60s.
playoffs. I know, I know.
It
I
was,
remember that
yeah,
game.
yeah. That part
16-14.
wasn't cool, but it was amazing to see the old man who got kicked out of San Francisco for the new guy, the new young guy, and said, "No, I still get it, and I'll prove it."
No, because it is the key is it's about leadership. And the quarterback can provide leadership, but a rookie is never going to come in and do that.
Hmm.
So, you know, the whole Stroud thing wouldn't be working if it wasn't
Yeah,
for the coaching of Miko, right? It wouldn't be without the focus on creating an organization that we've had ever since ticket sales went down, you know, creating an organization that wants to win. The mentality thing, just like I talked
yeah,
about with the uniforms. Oh, they switched halfway to the season. No, that was a shift in mentality of the organization that says, look, we're out there being patsies. Come on,
yeah.
let's play more aggressive. I don't care if you get more penalties. I don't care. You just go out there and you hit hard, right? That was the shift. It wasn't the uniform change. You know, that the shift was organizational. And that's what we had with the Texans. They went out and got a hard-nosed defensive coordinator to be the head coach. And they said, you know what? You make your staff and you help us draft. We want the quarterback, but what do you want? Oh, I want Will Anderson. I want that defensive end that can come in and crush a quarterback. Okay, we're gonna trade to do both. We're gonna give you what you want, and we're gonna give the fans what they want. The whole mentality of the organization changed, and that's gonna bring it up. Now with the Jets, they've had a pretty good defense for a little while. Brees Hall comes in, and he's a pretty
Hmm.
damn good running back.
Hmm.
They said, you know what? But we're still not winning with Garrett Wilson. We're still not winning with Geno Smith. We're still not winning with all these quarterbacks. We need somebody who has won and who knows how to win to come in and be the head of that side. And that's what they brought in because the coach is the same. What is it say? Saleh or whatever. I
Saleh,
can
yeah.
Salah, yeah. The coach is the same. The rest of the team is the same, but all of a sudden they're a winning team. I think it can work. It just
Hmm.
can't be from the bottom. It just can't be a draft pick. It has to be some sort of veteran leadership that comes in, whether it be, like you said, the coach or the team, a team leader itself.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we've been yelling at the clouds for over 2 hours at this point, so
Oh
that's
shit, it's
more
been
than
that
enough
long?
time to wrap it up. Yep.
Yeah. Well, at
So,
least we have four distinct parts on this, and I might go back through it just to timestamp them in the comments. So
all right. Well, we will see y'all Wednesday for Wheel of Time, and we got past one of our least favorite parts in the whole series. Maybe that'll make the next section go a little quicker and easier and be a little more fun.
I do like the shift because it is a lot better to come home from class and read fiction for that
Yeah.
night to catch up than it was to try to do my homework and then read the fiction in between. So it was, yeah, I do like the shift that we made from Wednesday being Wheel of Time. So, and we'll be done with it pretty soon, relatively. And we got to figure out what we're going to do from that. And I was actually thinking of things we can do, and maybe we'll open with this next time. Is how do we continue Wheel of Time when we're done with Wheel of Time? Because that's where our comments come from and
Hmm.
most of our subscribers. So, and I was thinking, start formulating questions of the theory land kind of stuff, of all the unanswered things,
Hmm.
or you know, we've brought up a lot of things that were like, oh well, what is Sanderson versus Jordan? And maybe we can just do like we used to do in the dorm rooms where we'd sit around and just talk about the meta parts of it to predict what will be or what would have been. So maybe we can do that for a few more episodes at least, and that'll get us to the next season of the quote unquote live action fake
Oh,
shit.
geez.
Yeah. So or also suggest maybe another I think Scott had suggested another fiction series that we might go into as a first read instead of a reread. So we
That'd be an interesting thought. Might
yeah.
look into that. All right. Well,
And if that's the case, please give us a break from Sanderson. I would just ask that.
please,
So
yes,
yeah.
please.
All
All
right.
right.
Later.